If you know much about Old Testament history, a guy by the name of Saul became the very first king of Israel. King Saul was a real standout. I mean, he stood head and shoulders above everyone else. Very handsome guy, and he began so well. Saul began so well as a king. There was some humility there. He felt unworthy. He didn't put himself forward as being king. As a matter of fact, when he realized he was going to be king, he went and hid. They had to come and find him. So, King Saul started so well. But there was there was some growing pride that took place in his life. And I'm not exactly sure what caused it. Perhaps it was successes. Some people have suggested that Saul was bipolar. And, he had a bipolar moment. His moods would swing crazily. But he did something that had an adverse effect on the nation. There was an army getting ready to attack King Saul. Philistines were getting ready to attack Israel near a place called Michmash. And the instruction that Saul was given, it was wait until Samuel showed up. Samuel would come. They would do some kind of a sacrifice, and just wait until Saul was supposed to wait until Samuel got there. Then they would discern what God's will was in all of this. So King Saul went with his armies, and they were waiting and waiting and waiting, and Samuel didn't come. 7 days. They waited there 7 days, and Samuel never showed up. And Saul became very, very impatient. So he offers a sacrifice to God. He offered a burnt offering to God himself, and in hopes that, I can't wait for God any longer, so, I'm going to do this myself. That way we can discern God's will. Just as he was doing that, Samuel shows up. Samuel shows up and he says, "What is it you have done?" This is 1 Samuel 13, and that's verse 11. And Saul says, "I saw my men scattering from me, and you didn't arrive when you said you would, and the Philistines are at Michmash ready for battle. So I said, Philistines are ready to march against us, and I haven't even asked for the Lord's help. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering myself before you came." And this is the response that God gives back to King Saul. "How foolish," Samuel exclaimed. "You've not kept the command of the Lord, the command that the Lord your God gave you. Had you kept it, the Lord would establish your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom must end, for the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. The Lord has already appointed him to be the leader of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." Wow. Wow. There was clear instruction. The instruction came from God. It says, go to this place and wait. And wait. God says, wait. And when I show up, I'll give you instructions of what to do. And of course, God was going to give that instruction through the prophet Samuel. But King Saul got tired of waiting. He just couldn't wait anymore. Could not wait on God's timing. Could not wait for God to reveal his will. Here's the question that I think we are faced with today. Am I more concerned for God's will to be done than my own desire to be fulfilled? That's the question that we are faced with here at the end of the week as we take a look at patience. Are we more concerned for God's will to be done than for my own desires to be fulfilled? And before you answer that question, take seriously the repercussions that King Saul faced. I'll confess to you that there are a lot of times in my life it gets very, very difficult to wait on God's timing. Maybe like myself, you want God to answer our prayers yesterday, but there's a lot of times we have to pray for months on end, years on end, and still see no results. And the temptation is to take matter into our own hands, isn't it? We get impatient waiting on God's timing. What does it say to a watching world when we stop waiting for God and instead try to solve the problems in our own strength and in our own way? As the world watches, what does it say to them? Now, I would say that both King Saul and Abraham didn't see the big deal. They didn't see the bigger picture. They felt that, what's the harm? What could go wrong? It's not that big of a deal. I'll just take matters into my own hand. But the Old Testament has taught us in these particular instances and many others, when we refuse to wait on God's timing and take matters into our own hands, there's a good chance it has lifelong repercussions. Lifelong repercussions. We could lose our standing before God because of our disobedience with Him, because we lack patience with Him, in the case of Abraham. Or it could upset a delicate balance because, again, in the life of Abraham. So I don't want you to take very lightly the question that I ask. Am I more concerned for God's will to be done than my own desire to be fulfilled? As I tell you the truth, when we are more concerned about our own desires and we lack patience in waiting on God's will, it might not seem like a big deal. It might not. You might think to yourself, what's the harm? What's the worst thing that could happen? You don't know that answer. You don't know what God had planned and intended to do by asking you to wait for His timing. You don't know that. We can't know that. We're not supernatural. We're not all-knowing like God is. When we refuse to wait on God's timing and take matters into our own hands, we have no idea the chain of events, the effect that might have, not just for ourselves in the future, but also for those who come after us. Now, I know you might think to yourself, what's the big deal? You're looking at your own life and you say, I'm not a Paul, I'm not a Silas, I'm not a King Saul. I'm none of these people. I'm not an Abraham. My life is insignificant. That's what I think about myself. My life is insignificant. It means nothing. But I have often stopped and asked myself this question: what would have happened had I not responded to the God's call, God's leading to the churches that I have served and to the church that I am serving now? What would have been different in those people's lives, in those churches' lives, had I not responded and done what I wanted to do? I won't know that answer on this side of eternity. But you and I need to remember this. This is very important. I just want to end up with this thought. What you and I are doing today as Christians, what you and I are doing in the kingdom of God right here and right now, it has eternal significance. It does. The things that you do in the name of the Lord right now, the things that you do in the name of the Lord, they have eternal significance. There is no simple work that one does for the kingdom of God. You are a servant of the Master. God has called you to a task. God has placed you in a particular place or a particular situation for a purpose and for a reason. It doesn't always reveal itself, that purpose and that reason does not always reveal itself right away. It doesn't. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes we have to wait. But it is all within God's timing. And it's all within God's purpose. So nothing you do, I want you to hear this, nothing you do for the kingdom of God is ever insignificant. Nothing you ever do for the kingdom of God is insignificant. It has eternal weight and it has an eternal glory. So are you willing to be patient and wait for God to give the guidance, the leading and directing? or you just want to take matters in your own hands, do it your own way, in your own strength, and in your own power. I would hesitate to do that because the Bible teaches that when we do things in our own ways, in our own power, and in our own timing, it can have a lasting, damaging effect. And it diminishes the glory of God. So, let me just ask that question once again. Something for you to ponder as we go into the weekend. Are you more concerned with doing God's will, or are you more interested in your own desires to be fulfilled? Something to think about, right? Well, I hope you have a great weekend. We'll get back together again on Monday as we take a look at another characteristic that should be found in the life of a Christian. My name is Pastor Greg, and you've been watching Transforming the World. Have a good weekend, my friend.